Greetings all, BWS2K here, and today we are doing another random hack video, but with a new setup. So this is kind of like the next step, the next evolution of the slides, the pink and blue slides that we used last time. It's pretty self-explanatory. We have got a couple tables there, 4 tables. One is for the sets, so always going to use distinctions. But then you roll a d4, d6, d8, and that's going to give you the other 2 sets. And then genres, you roll 3 times on that table, and that's just the table from the book. I put a d10 table in there for a theme, which could be kind of cool. And then the mod table, so you roll a d12 there, and you have to use that mod or set or something like that, whatever it happens to be. Some of the stuff that happened last time was really awesome, and I just want to point out again that the point of these things is to inspire, right? So if you end up with 3 genres and then you go through the whole process and then it turns out that you were like, oh, I rolled giant robots, but I don't have anything giant robot-y in my hack. That's fine. That's cool. Mission achieved. It's just to get you moving, just to get you kind of going in that direction, and then where you go from there is totally up to you. And the same is true of like different mods, adding different mods. I know a lot of times we would hit a spot where it was like, oh, well, I've rolled this mod and I really don't know how to make that mod work. Sometimes the answer is use another mod in conjunction with it. So like in theory, the idea is you have to use what you roll. But by the same token with the genre example, sometimes you get to the point where it's like, this doesn't really fit super well. So it's as much about a challenge to the creative process as it is like a recipe for making an amazing hack. And I'll tell you that personally, I have learned a lot more about how each of the sets and mods work together as a result of just kind of going through this process, because it gets you the experience, right? It's almost like playing with Legos. But the first time you pick up Legos, you're going to put a couple blocks together, or like the Minecraft house, your first Minecraft house, right? It's like, this looks amazing. And then, you look back, years later and you're like, that was not amazing. And it's the same thing here. You're getting to play with the pieces and put them all together and see how they fit together, and then that just kind of helps you to know moving forward what does work best in situations, or what combinations work. And then one day, you're on the Discord and somebody says, hey, I'm really stuck on how the relationship mod works with trait statements. And you're like, zing, I know this one. And you hop in there and you help each other out, or you have some particular insight into how you can make resources work with signature assets in a way that doesn't just totally overwhelm the character sheets or something like that. It's all just about getting familiar with the pieces as much as like the end product. The journey, it's about the journey, not the destination. All right, that's kind of the overarching slogan here. So let's go through it. Go through the process and see where we end up, and then I'm gonna do all the rolling all kind of at once so that I can just mute that section. Again, I know some folks aren't crazy about dice rolling noises, so I'm gonna do that all together, and then we'll unmute and we'll discuss, and then we'll see where the day takes us. My hope, my secret goal is to get this all done like by dinner time tonight, and it's already noon because I've had technical difficulties. So hey, I mean, when you're embracing chaos, why not hug a little tighter, right? Okay, all right, I'm going to mute, and I'm going to roll through the tables, and then we'll pick back up. Okay, so we rolled a 14 for sets, which is skills and powers. I don't know if you were paying attention when I rolled the genres, but I rolled a 10, a 16, and a 10 again. So I rolled a fourth time so that we could have 3 unique results. So 10 is military, 16 is superhero, and 6 is giant robots. This may turn out to be the best thing I've ever made in my life. Themes, we rolled 8, which is the supernatural. Yep, definitely a high probability this is the best thing I've ever created. The third mod is the Doom Pool. We are rocking. All right. Well, I'm very familiar with the Doom Pool, and I love it. Super versatile, super helpful, super useful. Just all around a really great mod. And if you watch my other videos with Marvel Heroic, I'm very familiar with using it there. Actually, I'm very familiar with using it, but I'm not always wise with how I use it. Sometimes I get hoardy and just kind of have this giant Doom Pool, which in itself is okay. All right, so we're done with the rolling. We've got our results. I'm going to take a quick break, set up our visuals here so we can be looking at all the same things at the same time, and then we'll go back through and work through sort of brainstorming how things can connect. All right, so let's do that. Here we go. We've got everything kind of typed out, a little bit easier to read. I took the sentence from the Core Chaotix, one of the original versions, where I had a sentence that just kind of put it all together. So our construction sentence here is, this is a game that combines the military, superhero, and giant robot genres with the theme of the supernatural, utilizing distinctions, powers, and skills as sets, and the Doom Pool mod. So that just kind of is like a snapshot of what we're doing. I oftentimes just go to Wikipedia and look up genres that I'm less familiar with and see if I can find ideas. So I copied a couple paragraphs for the supernatural theme. These are straight from Wikipedia, minus the little numbers and brackets. So we'll read it. The supernatural theme, in its broadest definition, supernatural fiction overlaps with examples of weird fiction, horror fiction, vampire literature, ghost story, and fantasy. Elements of supernatural fiction can be found in writing from the genre of science fiction amongst academics, readers, and collectors. However, supernatural fiction is often classed as a discrete genre defined by the elimination of horror and fantasy and elements important to other genres. The one genre supernatural fiction appears to embrace in its entirety is the traditional ghost story, which I highlighted because I feel like of that entire little bit, I feel like ghost story is maybe something that could be really fun. The next paragraph, the fantasy and supernatural fiction genres would often overlap and may be confused for each other, though there exists some crucial differences between the two genres. Fantasy usually takes place in another world where fantastical creatures or magic are normal. In supernatural fiction, which is kind of what we're doing, magic and monsters are not the norm, and the mystery of such things is usually closely intertwined in the plot. So again, I highlighted that. The supernatural genre highlights supernatural creatures or happenings within the real world. Moreover, supernatural fiction also tends to focus on suspense and mystery and less on action and adventure. So the other genres I was a little bit more familiar with and a little bit more straightforward, but the supernatural genre, even though I kind of like know what it, or excuse me, the supernatural theme, I kind of knew what it was, but I really wanted to kind of like do a little research, right? And I love doing that, like putting all the pieces out and kind of pulling out of it. So if that's our theme, is like the unknown or like the ghost story or like the unseen, supernatural just means above nature, right? So it's outside of what we understand in terms of like the natural laws, right? So it's something that either defies what we have established to be true, or challenges that, or exists kind of in an outside area that just can't be understood or comprehended with the known ways. Okay, so that is the theme, like the supernatural theme. Military genre is pretty straightforward. Literally, there's one sentence on Wikipedia. Military fiction is a genre of fiction focusing on military activities, which is the part that I highlighted, such as war, battles, combat, fighting, or military life. So this is going to be probably using the action-based resolution mod. Just off the top of my head at this point, probably something that's going to be very, if we say combat heavy but not combat focused, because we're going to be kind of hitting that supernatural theme, but this is going to be a big piece of it. The superhero genre, I didn't bother to write a whole lot down. I just hit the high points. Most folks are familiar with it. You're familiar with it. I'm familiar with it. Supervillains, alter egos, which is something that I really like to dig into. Ethics, the ethics of being a hero. Like, what does it mean to be a hero? How do you get to be the one to decide what's right and wrong, and so on. Continuity and death in terms of like the permanence of the narrative, and even crossing over into other heroes or stories and narratives and things like that. And then the giant robot genre, which is similarly pretty straightforward, although there's a lot more about it on Wikipedia. But mecha, right? Like, you're familiar with Mech Warrior or Battletech or like Voltron or Gundam or all these kinds of things. So you have giant robots, giant vehicles. They're not necessarily autonomous beings, piloted and either humanoid or at least limbed. So they may not be humanoid, but they have different moving limbs, like a giant spider vehicle. And then they specifically mention the fact that they're usually fighting machines or gladiators, and that they're piloted. So stopping right there, just thinking about it, my first inclination was, are we fighting ghosts? Like, is that do you remember the movie Final Fantasy when it came out? Visually, it was amazing. I'm not sure that the narrative made much sense to anybody, but it was a long time ago. It may make more sense to me now. But like the idea that you could protect yourself from like ghosts with like force fields against ghosts or supernatural beings anyway. Is that what we're doing? Are we in these giant protected mecha suits or mecha vehicles or even mecha cities that are protected from the supernatural entities because they're just everywhere? Something like that. Because then it becomes, well, so how does the superhero work? Well, so maybe the superheroes are the ones that fight the ghosts. It's Ghostbusters in mecha, right? But I feel like where those things could be kind of funny or silly, if we're really digging into the supernatural theme and the ghost stories and the kind of vibe that's coming from that, we want it to be a little bit more serious in tone, or at least less comedic, less superficial. Suspense and mystery, those are typically themes that are a little bit deeper. Which brings us to the next piece, and I'll scroll down a bit here. We have the power set. So this is a direct quote from the book: superhuman ability or extraordinary quality. But then we have, you can do as powers, you can just do straight powers, or you can do power sets, which is what Marvel Heroic does, or you can use abilities, which is sort of an alternate form or an alternate way of expressing superhuman ability and extraordinary quality. That wonderful question about do I use powers or do I use abilities, and what's the difference? I think I'm just going to have a whole segment on that before we finish, a couple minutes about that and my thoughts on it anyway. I'm no authority or anything. So we've got options for power set. Sorry, my brace keeps coming loose. We have skills, which are training or experience. So if we think about the pilots, right, being of the mecha, it's probable that we're going to want to use a motor pool, which is something I've not dealt with, but in Cortex Prime, it's basically your vehicle's mechanic. And so I think we might want to use that. But skill sets are training or experience. And so you can represent them as a skill list, which is like a traditional, here's a list of all the skills, and anything that you aren't trained in is a default D4. We can also use roles, which I really like roles a lot. They are really good at representing a lot of things in one trait. And then specialties. Specialties are an alternative, which, again, if you've watched the Marvel Heroic videos I have, they're sort of catch-all, broader category than a skill, but treated differently and usually a much shorter list. And then Doompool mod, which again, super familiar with, super love it. Basically, it's like 3-in-1. You have the threat level, so as the Doompool grows, there's this looming threat that grows. As the Doompool wanes and shrinks, then you're kind of reaching that part in the narrative where there's a little bit of a breather. People can do recovery actions or whatever. Pacing, because again, as the Doompool builds, it's signaling that, okay, something big is going to happen. And as it kind of shrinks and gets spent out of, then that kind of tells you that you're kind of entering that lull. But then you have the limited Doompool option, which I've never used before, but which could be interesting with... it could be interesting, could be something to think about. And then crisis pools. Crisis pools can be their own thing. They can be sort of a standalone thing, but you can create them out of the Doom pool, which is why I mentioned them there. They're not so much a mod of... Well, I guess they technically are a mod of the Doom pool mod, but it's kind of like a way that you can use the Doom pool to make opposition that isn't like fully fleshed out data files or something like that. I really, really like crisis pools a lot. And then I put the questions from the last document, things to be thinking about as we're going through this. What does the combination of sets and mods signal to prospective players? Which, if you've watched my other video, am I not wearing my wedding? I'm not wearing my wedding ring. Is it in my pocket still? Oh my goodness. Sorry about that, Mrs. BW. There's sort of that axiom about a character sheet is a wish list, and I don't disagree with that, but I think an empty character sheet in Cortex Prime is also communication from the GM about what players can expect and what the game is going to emphasize. And I covered that a little bit better in a previous video, but suffice to say that that's something we'll be thinking about. What we're choosing signaling to players about what our game is going to be about. Not just the title, not just like the names of the different things you can be, but like the actual sets and traits that we're using. Who should play this game? Who would be interested in this game? Who would not be interested in this game? It seems like a silly question to ask, and yet, as a person who's run games on the internet with people that I've never met before, it's sometimes a really important question to ask so that you can just nip it in the bud and say, look, I don't know if you're good for this game, like, or at least I don't know if you understand what the expectation is of this game. Not a huge hurdle, but it's just kind of like one of those important questions that you don't want to skip past. What do characters do in a session, and what does the narrator do in a session? That's just kind of thinking about how is the flow of the game going to go, and then how do characters grow? And I should put, if characters grow, is character growth a necessary component of your game? Maybe it's meant to be more one-shotty or just kind of like small arcs, and it's not necessary to have character growth. But if you choose character growth, then that is going to tell your characters, again, sort of like the combination of sets and mods, that's going to tell them what they should be focused on for character growth. So if we use relationships with trait statements, right, and you have challenging trait statements as a way to grow, then that's telling your players, I know we're not in here, but that would be telling your players that interpersonal relationship connections, the ebb and the flow and the change of that's all the stuff that you're going to want to dig into if you want your character to thrive in this setting. So for us, we've got to kind of figure out how we want characters to grow. So that's all the things that we're thinking about. I'm going to break for lunch and then mull all this over and then come back and hopefully have some ideas about something. I really do, for the moment, I really do like the idea of being sort of mecha Ghostbusters in a sort of ghost realm of some kind. I'm not super sure what beyond that. So would characters would probably play the pilots. And so maybe it's that they've been stranded. Maybe they've been stranded in their suits in some other dimension or other plane. And so it's kind of about that, or maybe their colony has been stranded. I don't know. You can see I'm wondering, but something like that. I think we've got some really cool options and some really cool potential. So I'm gonna go have lunch, and I'll come back, and we'll do what we do next. I often talk about the moment when things click together, sort of that eureka moment. And I think we have it. So it's been a couple hours. So it's 2:30 now, and I had my lunch break, and then I kind of started writing and didn't want to stop until I had finished to come back and make the video. So this is the document, just picking up from where we left off. I'm not going to read everything, but I'll kind of bring you through sort of the mind map or path that I went. So my first thought, and you can kind of see it highlighted there, I just started jotting down ideas. And I had journeying into the spirit realm for discovery or aid. So I was thinking, remember on that Final Fantasy vibe, I was thinking like, what would it be like if the characters were journeying into the other realm and they had to do this in mecha, which was really interesting to me and I liked it a lot. So I kind of took that and then started running along that road, and then I started thinking about how does that work with the sets that we have, right? Like, how do you make it so that you have powers and skills? Because skills feels very mundane, although you could do specialties with it, right? That's what Marvel Heroic did. But it feels mundane when you have powers and you're also talking about a spirit realm. I couldn't get all three of them on the same page, right? So then I thought, well, what if you have the skills when you're not in the spirit realm and powers when you are in the spirit realm? But that was half of an idea. And then I started kind of going further in that on that path and thought, what if the PCs were some of the only humans left? Okay, so we have this sort of raging war, this perpetual war that's going on the planet, or in the galaxy or whatever, and they are one of the few humans left. Everyone else, or almost everyone else, is spirits, like ghosts, resurrected spirits of fallen soldiers who are put into robots to go out and fight again. So there's a lot of sheltered vibes, like the humans, the PCs don't know how much they should be trusting authority. Theoretically, there's a war going on somewhere, but they've never been on the front lines because they're squishy and would probably not last long. As a result of so then their job, because machines can't go through to the spirit realm, their job is to travel to the spirit realm and rescue the souls of fallen soldiers or military leaders or whoever it is that they are told that they need to recover. Find them, track them down and find them, and then bring them back. And then those souls are implanted into or anchored to machine bodies. So then I was like, okay, I like that idea. That's really trippy and I love it. And I just love the idea of what it would mean to, as the GM, just hand over to the players and be like, okay, so describe me what you see in the spirit realm. Like, you throw out some things, but then just let the players kind of riff on it. I love when that sort of description just happens at the table. So I was thinking, okay, so we've got them going, but then how do we marry all of this together? I'll scroll down a little bit more. And so then I had this idea of if they're going and they're doing that, then they could still use the skills over there. If the skill set is pretty specifically like tracking and finding clues and maybe like some charisma, convincing kind of stuff, because maybe the souls don't want to leave. If we're thinking of opposition as being like spiritual entities, forces, as much as just kind of general dangers going on in that realm, then and then realize that the PCs have these superpowers that they have as a result of going back and forth and being in the spirit realm, but they don't have superpowers when they're not in the spirit realm. So they're kind of like I guess in my mind it's almost just a sense of like the epic nature of what it would mean to have a superpowered PC in the spirit realm, in challenging or encountering the myriad kind of like unknowns and others there, while finding or searching out a specific, almost like Saving Private Ryan being crossed with like, I'm thinking of in the Star Trek movie where Spock is traveling through to get to V'ger, and it's just all these wild like set pieces and things like that. I just love that feel. So like combine those two kinds of things with this idea that you've got to find and rescue someone, and maybe that someone doesn't want to be rescued. Like that could be a really cool twist. So one of your challenges is to convince that person, or it may be that person needs to be rescued from some sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like an inset challenge within the spirit realm, like maybe a mini realm kind of. So just like all of the possibilities there, and then they have to bring them back. And then as I was writing, I revisited the questions and kind of had this thought of just like, so as a GM, like where would that lead? What would you do? And I thought, what if so if we used session records for growth, that means that players grow by playing, right? So the more sessions you play, then the more that allows you to improve. And it's a pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can use the session records as callbacks, though, which is really, really the strength of session records. So when you're in the middle of an encounter or you're journeying or something like that, you can say, hey, I remember a spirit beast like this. Remember back 2 missions ago when we did this? And you get a plot point. Or you can call back to saying, hey, you know, the first soldier that we rescued said something about a you know, Project Icarus, and this scientist that we're after is just stammering about Icarus. I wonder if there's a connection. Like, you can have those callbacks and sort of start to work on an overall narrative, and see that unfold, which is just, I love that kind of stuff. So I don't want to read everything that I wrote, but definitely the vibe that we were going on, that I was going on, was to just experience the supernatural as a super juxtaposed with the natural world and being more mundane, but also being just as other, just as threatening, just as looming, because we've got the Dune Pool, and what it means to be one of the few who walks in both worlds, and how interesting would it be if once a recovered soul is anchored to a machine, if it falls in battle, whatever that might mean, it's no longer recoverable. So you're going and you're recovering almost like a second conscription, right? But the risk for that person is if they're ever destroyed again, then they're gone. There is no more afterlife for them. Which puts our PCs in a very unique place of being able to travel in both worlds, not super belonging in either, and that's maybe that kind of knowledge or that revelation changes the way they think about their mission. I mean, that's sort of a big reveal later on, right? Like, it's not necessarily a day one revelation, but just something to build towards that kind of a thing, putting those choices out on the table, and then role-playing through all the kind of, like, nuanced stories that you could go through. So I left my stuff up on the screen. I didn't read it. You can read through it, but I wanted to do an update before the day got too far gone. And then what we'll do is I'll probably work on a character sheet next and figure out, so we know we have distinctions, we know we have powers, and we know we have skills. So the next step is really honing in on a skill list, honing in on how we want to do powers, whether we want to do it as just straight powers as a trait, do we want to do power sets, do we want to do abilities, and then distinctions. And what do we want to use for our distinctions? 3 is like the usual number, and they all usually have hinder. But I like to kind of try different things and see if maybe 5 distinctions make sense, or putting more SFXs, SFXs on the distinctions is more fun. Like, I'm less familiar with that, so I like to push myself. Is there a way, you think about Eidolon Alpha, which is in the book, there's an interesting way that power sets get used, and scale dice. Scale dice is something that could be used as well, depending on what you're doing, especially if you're in the material realm and you have all these giant robots. There's a lot of flip-flop that I think could be really, really cool and really interesting to play through. Okay, so that's my update. Let's see where I get with lists. All right, so we have a really important reminder as I was sort of brainstorming. It is now 4:45, so it's been almost 5 hours, and powers are a prime set. So this idea that they only have powers when they're in the spirit realm is not going to hold up unless we have an analog or just even allow it outside. And I think, honestly, we can allow it. And I feel like there's a part of me that wants to give PCs a scale die when they're in the spirit realm, or when they're not. I'm just trying to think in my head. So, like, you start in the material world, you get a briefing, go to the other side, find this, famous general that we just lost in some big battle or whatever, and then bring them back. But of course, the spirit realm is full of the unknown, and there are these, dangers and obstacles, but also it can be, there are other entities living there, right? Who may be malevolent or maybe not. And so you navigate through that, and you find the general or whoever, and you bring them back through. So then the question is, like, are you really spending much time not in the spirit realm? And the more I think about it, the more it's like, no, I don't think you're actually spending a lot of time not in the spirit realm. The whole shtick is that you're over there doing stuff. So I'm not really sure. So recognizing that powers are a prime set, and then being like, oh no, how does that, I can't split it up, and then like coming full circle and being like, actually, are they going to be doing much rolling when they're not like in the spirit realm? So so I settled on using the skill and specialty split mod, which basically says you can have skills that are all rated at like D4 for untrained, and then you can upgrade to D6, and then from that you can have specialties within them. So the 6 skills that I narrowed down to that I feel like are going to matter the most: fight, any kind of combat, warfare kind of stuff; focus, which is more like concentration, trying to remember something, trying to decipher something, interpret something; influence, which would be like your charisma kind of thing, convincing, motivating, seducing, tricking, like verbally tricking, manipulation, that kind of thing; investigate, so that's going to be the looking at clues, right? Whatever contextually that might be, maybe building a dossier, or deciphering, the subtext of when someone's sharing something or whatever. Traverse would be moving, so that would be moving through space. So that's like dodging and also stealth stuff and climbing, jumping from a big height, that sort of thing. And then track, and I have track set up as a separate skill from investigate because that's such a big piece of what they're doing and so distinct from it that track is not so much about picking up the clues, but once you have this sort of quote unquote scent, like once you have an idea of how to track or how to follow the markings that you see, because in the spirit realm I'm wondering maybe there's like footprints, something like that. So it's a distinct piece from investigate, though to be honest there is probably some times where they overlap, and that's just up to like the table and character preference or player preference. So if we have those as skills, then they could pick specialties within them, and the specialties are open for the table, like with GM approval. But you could have like a D8 or D10 specialty in a particular skill. I didn't put the notes on the page. But so if each of those are a D4 or D6, I had pick 3 of the skills to make a D6, and then you had 2 D8s to assign as a specialty in something. So it's kind of like you'd have fight, focus, and influence at D6s, investigate, traverse, and track at D4s, but you might have a D8 investigate in like history or like profiling, somebody's profile. So like part of the briefing in the beginning, you picked up some clues, you roll, you make an asset or something like that. And then maybe you have a D8 in fight, specifically using like billy clubs or something like that. So you kind of combine them. So if you're using a billy club, you'd use the D8. If you're just using your fists, you use the D6 fight. So it's kind of like that. You don't use both, you use one or the other, but the skills kind of have a smaller window. Does that make sense? A lower ceiling. And then you have your specialties, which go higher. So that was for the skills. And then for abilities, if it's not yet evident, I'm a big fan of keeping it simple, small sets, lots of room for players to just kind of be creative in the moment. And I know that that's sometimes, I know that is oftentimes a shortcoming, but it feels more like I don't want to get so caught up in the crunch, because it feels to me that the more caught up in the crunch I get, the more opportunity there is to get tripped up by the crunch in the game. So pick an ability from the ability list in the game, in the book, and then rate it at D8, and grab 2 SFX for it, and go. Yes, there's going to be somebody who shows up and tries to me monster. That's not something you confront with the rules, right? That's something you confront at the table. You just say, maybe even privately, look, I see that you're picking, density control, and your idea is to phase all of the machines into the spirit realm or something, which sounds cool, but that's not really what we're doing, and that's not really what the game is about. So could they maybe pick another one or something like that, right? And then, so with that being said, then I went with 3 distinctions. I think we could probably do more, but just for the sake of bringing some closure to the day's events, one being your training as a soldier, before you were picked for the program, which I assigned the exchange SFX. First journey to the other side, kind of in the second distinction with the edit SFX, and then how you feel when you use your powers as the price SFX. Now that's a tricky one, because I was like, but you're not with powers as a prime set, or in this case, I guess we went with abilities, but with that being a prime set, you're always going to be including that die, and I think that's why it's going to make it really interesting, and why so much of it, the game, is going to happen in the spirit realm, where those things make a little bit more sense anyway. So then, how you feel when you use your powers just feels like a really awesome opportunity for like hindering and getting plot points, or like really cool role play and change over time, and it's just stuff like that. So that's where we ended up with. I still don't have a good name. I was tossing around in the Discord, Deus Ex Mecha, but I don't know that I want to settle on that. And like the Dragon Heist, I don't know that this is going to be something which is going to be fully finished. I'll tinker with it, throughout the next couple days and see if I can land somewhere. And if I do, I will do a follow-up video with the final product, just a little short one showing it off. But for now, that's what we have. So, what did we accomplish? We used the new random hack generator that kind of had themes and genres, which I really liked, actually. I do miss more of the articulation from the old tables. So maybe we have to roll 2d12s to get 2 mods or something. It feels like it's good, but I need more. I know I just said I don't like crunch, but I need a little bit more granularity. I need a little bit more official Cortex things. A little bit. So I think I want to maybe adjust with that. But so we did that. That was like the big point of this video. Other than the second part, which is I'm going to time how long it takes to upload this video to YouTube with my new internet speed, which hopefully won't take very long at all. And then we got to kind of go through the creative process, leaning heavy onto themes, whereas in the other process we had the 2 genres and a subgenre, but we didn't really have a theme, and I liked having a theme. I liked that a lot. I like how that informs. But, it brings us to that really important piece about when someone asks, how does this set work, or how does this trait work, or how does this mod work? It's really hard in Cortex to think about just one. Everything kind of relates to each other. So how are you using abilities? If you ask, do I choose powers or abilities? It's really related to what else is going on in your game. Like how else is your player experiencing the world? How else is the world, the opposition, the challenges that they meet, the antagonists? Like what's the dynamic going on there on the table? Because that's really what informs how you make those kinds of choices. And in this case, I went with abilities instead of powers because I don't think it's as necessary to have a plethora of powers as much as it is to have a couple really cool ones, or in this case, just beginning with one, and being able to do really cool things with it. Because the emphasis is going to be this. Again, this feels like a game that's not going to have a whole lot of rolling, so it doesn't feel like there needs to be a lot on the character sheet as far as like different, like a power set. This is just kind of like, this is, you spend a plot point and you can do this cool thing. That's a wide open door for a lot of interesting character ideas in this setting. I guess the setting is the big buy-in here. Like, oh my goodness, someone's going to hear this and you're going to, I know exactly what I want to do. How do I do it? And I hate being like, oh, actually, we're not using that or whatever. I like being able to just have the doors swung wide open and be like, that sounds perfect. Come do it. I mean, I have a little aside here, but I think did I mention it in, I don't think I've mentioned it in a video before, but I ran a game recently where I had some players. One of them was a sentient school bus. And it was a fantastic game, and everybody did amazing, and everybody, like, it was just chef's kiss, beautiful, loved it. And if you're watching this and you played in that game, thank you. It was a great time. But as a GM, I never know what to expect, and I always want to leave a lot of room for really out there ideas, because those seem to be the ideas that really push me and to the edge of my ability to GM, but also to the edge of my creativity. I just had a different game recently where one of the characters used echolocation, didn't have the sense of sight, had no eyeballs. And wow, how many times do we describe a setting in terms of color, or in terms of light, or in terms of, visuals of some kind, and then suddenly we have to go, hang on a second, this character wouldn't be able to discern that at all. So I love those kinds of things. Okay, sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but my point is, I don't like to go too narrow in my selection, and I like to be able to just allow room for those really wild character ideas that come in, because I find that when somebody comes up with those wild ideas, they usually really want to play that character, and if they really want to play that character, then that's what's going to make for a good experience, because they're really invested in the story, and then we're just going to have that wonderful loop that goes back and forth. Okay, so that's our Deus Mecha hack made in about 5 hours minus some lunchtime. And if you have any thoughts, comments, observations, suggestions, anything I said wrong, did wrong, if you want to see me do more of these, less of these, if you have ideas for a future video, all that kind of stuff, throw it in the comments, and I will appreciate it. And with that being said, I think that's it, and we're going to close here. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Excelsior.